for introducing me. Thanks the Global Big Data Conference Committee for inviting me to this event. Let me try my slide. So yeah, the title of my talk is going to be called DataOps for the modern computer vision stack. Just a brief slide on the presenter profile, just to kind of be familiar with who I am. So as Mr. Murthy just mentioned, so I'm working at SuperAI as a data advocate. I basically responsible for all the content and partnership initiatives. I'm also a writer, so I write publication that cover industry application, emerging research team, and advice from pioneers in the data space. Also host a podcast that basically feature our conversation with some of the practitioners and researchers to unpack some of the career lessons that they've learned along the way. In the past, I did ML research, data science, and data journalist, and currently I'm pretty interested in data ML infrastructure, venture capital, and community-led growth, because I think that all of these areas, are kind of in the same vein to drive the adoption of ML in the enterprise. So this is a brief agenda of what I'm gonna talk about today. First, I'm gonna define what is DataOps. Second, I will bring the case of applying DataOps in the context of computer vision. Third, I will examine some of the key principles of DataOps. Next, I will propose an ideal DataOps pipeline for the computer vision stack. Then I will going over some of the key data-related challenges that any computer vision teams have to deal with, and then I conclude my talk with some ideas on how the future of the modern computer vision stack might look like. So yeah, let's dive right in and understand what is DataOps. So to understand DataOps, you need to know a little bit about its cousin DevOps. So basically, DevOps is the transformation in the delivery capability of development and software teams, whereas DataOps focus on the transformation of intelligent system and analytic models by data analysts and data engineers. As you can see here in the slide, DevOps is sort of the synergy between QA, software engineering, and operation, right? And then the goal is to reduce the cost and time being spent on development and release cycle. And DataOps add an additional layer of data on top of that. So basically different data stakeholders collaborate at different levels to acquire data, transform data, model data, and obtain actionable insights. And I think just similar to how DevOps transformed the way in which software development cycle works, DataOps is also currently changing the best practices of handling data by bringing DevOps principle into that. And just another note about another piece of the ops family is called MLOps. So that merge operation with machine learning. So the idea is to apply DevOps pattern to automate the lifecycle of ML models. And both DataOps and MLOps can be viewed as an extension of the DevOps methodology. So DataOps cover the journey from data ingestion to transformation to like data preparation, and then MLOps take care of the rest of the ML development workflow, things like model training, model validation, model serving, and model monitoring. And so both of them combine together, make up the whole cycle of your ML system design. So you might be wondering, like, what has led to the rise of DataOps, right? So I think there are three main reasons. Number one is the massive volume of complex data. Especially since the 2010s, all the business that you think of these days had to work with a large volume of data coming from different sources in different formats, and especially in large enterprise, the data landscape is very complex. They have to handle like tens to thousands of data sources and formats. Second reason is the technology overload. So in order to answer a business question, the data needs to be in a format that you can understand and use for analysis. That means that all the data that you gather must undergo a series of transformation. The data needs to be profiled, cleaned, transformed, and stored in a secure location to ensure data quality, data integrity, and data relevance. And each of these processes that I just mentioned requires like specific tooling to handle, right? So if you see here on the slide, like this diagram here from Dataflow, it displays some of the tooling company that made up the modern analytics stack, ranging from data catalog to data profiling to BI and reporting, right? So all of this combined lead to technology overload. And finally, the third reason is diverse roles and mandates. So the idea is like the people who use the tools and technology to work on your data are also very diverse, right? Data engineers focus on data preparation and transformation. Data scientists worry about getting the right data for the algorithms. Data analysts care about building weekly reports and visualization. The IT operation cares about maintaining data access protocols and guaranteeing data quality, security, and integrity. And towards the end of the spectrum is the business manager, who care about finding out whether the business is flourishing. So bringing together all of these diverse technologies, processes, and people with different mandates creates collaboration overhead and friction between teams. And therefore, we need a DataOps framework in place to make sure that they can work well together. So this figure by Gradient Flow provides a partial list of some of the companies that are building solutions in some of the major areas that form the ecosystem of the DataOps landscape. So sitting at the bottom of the landscape is the infrastructure ops layer. So these include some of the tools that monitors the data plane and initiate a response to an event or failure. On top of that, is what we call the data plane. So the data plane includes the data from operation system, and these are some of the source systems that supply data into data warehouses, and also data lakes and data lakehouses. And the ETL and the visualization layers also, some of the tools that sit on within this layer. The DataOps stack also included the metadata category. So these are some of the tools that try to basically create a map of organizational data flow, checks the flow of the data, and enforce access and data quality. Another layer here is called the development layer. So it includes some of the tools used to manage complex processes that may include multiple experiment and iteration, as well as the collaboration that cuts across teams and unit. And here, you can see a couple of logos here. Most of the MLOps and DevOps data system reside in this layer. And all the way on the top of the stack is the data products and services layer. So this layer included some of the tools used to track business KPI and ML products and services. So yeah, I hope that sort of provide a broad overview of the complex processes and all the company initiative that try to create the DataOps landscape. For the second part of my presentation, I'm gonna argue for the case of bringing that practices into the domain of computer vision. And I think there are three main reasons why we need to do that. Number one is that in most real-world machine learning, data is more important than the models. And this contrasts with academic machine learning, which emphasize more on the modeling component rather than rethinking the data paradigm. And in the real world, there are so many data-related low-hanging fruits that we are missing right now. Whenever your model performance is bad, you should not only resort to investigating the model architecture or tuning hyperparameters, you actually should attempt to identify the root cause of bad performance in the data. And so DataOps can help you visualize, curate, and label only the data points that are worth being labeled and yield the most value with respect to a given task. The second reason is that preparing massive volume of unstructured data in computer vision can pose a variety of challenges, like dealing with the unpredictable nature of images and videos, managing the labeling workforce, allocating sufficient labeling budget, addressing data privacy, and so much more. And so before carrying on with the modeling component, the label data needs to be audited for correctness and quality. And this can only be done via rigorous data processing, data transformation, data augmentation, data visualization, and label quality assurance to see if the data can serve as part of your training set. So you put that into your model workflow. And I think that DataOps can help teams to spend time on gathering high-value data and creating valuable data sets, especially with practices like CI/CD, for instance. Data engineers can automate the data preparation workflow seamlessly. And the third and final reason is that building computer vision application is actually iterative. So you see in the slide, this is a figure from a talk given by Taiwo Pungas that basically shows the two loops of building an algorithmic product. So you have the algorithm development loop that entails three separate steps. First, you build your algorithm using, an ML frameworks, and then you measure your algorithms against your test set, right? And then you learn from some of your failure cases. Separate from this loop is what he called a product development loop, and that also included three separate steps. First, you build your products using some sort of microservice or infrastructure framework. And then you measure your product in production via monitoring and logging tools. And then finally, you learn your product failure cases using dashboard and analysis of live performance data. And DataOps can help speed up the iteration of these two loops, which can work together in at least two ways, right? So, the first way is to go from like step 3 here to step 4. Basically, the idea is like after the finish building the machining algorithms, the machine learning scientists can like provide those algorithms for the engineers to incorporate that into the computer vision product, right? And the second way that these two work together is go from step 6 to step 1. The idea is like after learning from some of the use case failures in production, the engineers can instruct the scientists to sample and annotate only some of the failure cases, and so those failure cases can be incorporated into the new training set that can be used for the next iteration of the algorithm development loop. So I think it's critical to like bring rigorous DataOps discipline to speed up these iteration of these two loops. Now, given that the practice of DataOps is fundamental to how data move across the stack, it is crucial to understand the core principles of DataOps. And so there are 6 principles for all of the data analytics projects that I will explain in detail as well. And for each of these principles, I will draw inspiration and try to examine how they can be adapted for computer vision projects. So the first principle is to implement best practices for development. In the data domain, data engineers, data analysts, and data scientists come from different sorts of background. And so, but the common thing is like, all of them have to write code, right? So it is very imperative for them to follow best practices in software engineering cycle guideline. So that means like you have to do version control, code reviews, unit testing, artifacts management, release automation, and infrastructure as code. So, be familiar with Git, know how to use Docker, understand how to use Terraform, for instance. And applying some of these software development best practices for computer vision is quite straightforward. To get started, I recommend you following this document by Google called Rules of ML, and then you also take a look at this checklist called SE for ML, and they basically gather a set of engineering best practices for developing software system with machine learning components. The second principle is to automate and orchestrate all the data flows from initial source to final deployment. So you want to automate your deployment with a CI/CD pipeline, and CI/CD stands for continuous integration, continuous delivery. You can use tools like Jenkins and also CI, for instance, to automate that deployment. You also want to discourage any kind of manual data wrangling, and the best way to go about doing that is to run your data flows using an orchestrator for tasks such as backfilling, scheduling, and gathering pipeline metrics. And some of the well-known open source orchestration tools in the market are Apache Airflow, Darkster, and Prefect. I think that applying CI/CD for computer vision is also quite straightforward. And a great resource to get started with is this article by ThoughtWorks called Continuous Delivery for Machine Learning. And that article basically talk about bringing continuous delivery principles and practices to ML application. The third principle is to test data quality in all stages of the data lifecycle. So in practice, you definitely want to test the data at the source by writing data unit tests, and then depending on the data sources that your data pipeline is connected to, you might want to write schema tests, SQL tests, or streaming tests. And then you want to validate your data at different stage of the data flow. Like basically when the data go from the data sources to a staging environment, when it undergo any sort of transformation procedure, when the data get promoted into the production stage, and when the data go into the data warehouse. And then you want to capture and publish some of the metrics across some of the stages I just mentioned. And finally, you want to reuse some of your test tools for your next project by building a common testing framework that can be standardized across your data team. So, and a well-known open source option in the market is called Great Expectation. I think they did a pretty good job of enforcing data quality testing for structured data, essentially. Now, for computer vision, I think continuous testing is quite tricky because you're working with images and video, right? So when you think about data quality for images and video, you really have to think about the quality of your label, right? And also distribution, data distribution across your set, right? So you have to think about like, does all the labels look the same across your labels? Is the labeling process consistently accurate across your data set? And because you're working with like the human in the loop component, right, the labels themselves, I think like building a common testing framework for label quality is definitely not an easy task. The fourth principle is to monitor quality and performance metrics across your data flows. And there's a terminology on this phase, basically it's called observability. So you want to improve your observability for your DataOps stack. And in practice, that means you first need to define your data quality metrics, and that can be broken down into technical metrics, functional metrics, and performance metrics. The second step is to visualize those metrics to appropriate data stakeholder so that they can take meaningful actions using meaningful alerts. And so what does observability look like for computer vision? I think that it could be a combination of data observability and model observability. So the team at Monte Carlo Data, they defined there's the 5 pillars of data observability to be freshness, distribution, volume, schema, and lineage. And so in the context of computer vision, these pillars can be translated to this question, like how up-to-date your labels are updated, how your labels are distributed within an image or video, how big the number of images is, how the labels are visualized and formatted, and then how your images are versioned. The team at Arise AI, they define concept of model observability to be the process of collecting model evaluation and in training, validation, and production environment, and then tying those evaluation with analytics to allow an engineers to connect all this part together to solve the ML engineering problems. And I think this translates directly into the computer vision workflow because, the output prediction from one model can serve as the input training data for the next model iteration. And if you want to dive deeper into like this concept of like, observability in the context of machine learning, the team at Y Labs, they proposed an anatomy of an enterprise AI observability platform that included some of the key capabilities such as telemetry collection, time series database, a debugging engine, an anomaly detection engine, and then a visualization layer. The fifth principle is to build a common data and metadata model. So most organizations face a significant challenge because the data comes from different sources and everybody look at the data system from different angle. And so, in software development, there's this concept of domain-driven design concept. And the idea is that you want to identify a similar terminology across different areas and then share that terminology across different teams. So, across development teams, data teams, and business team. And a pretty, robust, well-tested option in the market is called DBT. And that basically enables you to combine different data sources and put them in a common data warehouse so all the stakeholders can consume that. And then a more enterprise-focused approach is to invest in a data catalog to share data knowledge more broadly across the data organization. And with a data catalog, like each data owner can know exactly what he or she is provided with. And I put here in the slide some of the well-known open source data catalog in the market. Amundsen developed within Lyft, DataHub developed within LinkedIn, and then Marquez developed within WeWork. For computer vision, this principle really means that you want to create a repository of all of your image and video data from different sources. And this repository should include some of the details on the data structure, data quality, data definition, and data usage. And then ideally, you also want your users to access the metadata alongside the data itself. And the metadata of an image is basically going to be in the form of a JSON object, right? One thing, in my opinion, that is still very difficult to do is versioning control for unstructured data, right? And I think a solution like Pachyderm is a promising option that is currently on my horizon. And furthermore, if you're looking forward a little bit, a more sophisticated solution should be able to like provide a graphical representation of the data access lineage, because that can help simplify some of the future data governance and compliance concern. And this is the sixth and the final principle, is to empower collaboration among data stakeholders. So there are so many different ways to structure your data teams. But I think like the best approach is to embed the data thinking into every functional team. This is very similar to the concept of Agile in software engineering, where you basically want to be a cross-functional team with no division between key functions. And these teams can define important metrics and KPI together and craft shared objectives with the business goals. And then furthermore, you know, in order to remove some of the bottlenecks for data usage, you might want to like set up self-service data monitoring and democratize access to the data. And so in the context of computer vision, you know, while building a computer vision application, I think that an ideal DataOps team should be composed of the 4 core functions as outlined here in the slide. So you have the data labeling manager, who often work with in-house or offshore labeling team to help scale the throughput of data labeling. They help define labeling instruction, inspect the work of the labeling team, and decide how to handle complex or ambiguous scenarios. You have the same function is the data engineers. So they are responsible for designing, building, and maintaining datasets that can be leveraged in ML projects. And therefore, these data engineers collaborate very closely with the ML engineers. The third function is the data curator. So data curators are the expert in their respective data domains. They have the domain knowledge about the specific data, right? And they are capable of visualizing and manipulating the data sets. And their knowledge of the business goal and the machining capabilities can inform, you know, the whole organization on how to, you know, prioritize data curation, you know, to improve the ML system. Then finally, you have the head of DataOps. So they provide strategic oversight to the DataOps team. The goal is to create an environment that allows all different parties to access the data that they need painlessly, build the skills of the business to draw meaningful insights from the data, and then also to ensure data governance. And this head of DataOps can act as a bridge between the DataOps team and the other functional units within the organization, and serving as a visionary and a technical lead. Let's take a step back and, you know, looking at the broader picture. I think that the collaboration process between all of these, you know, 4 function, and even like between the DataOps team and the other like ML application team, I think it's still very ad hoc at most organization, and there is room for tooling best practices to make this process more efficient. So as you know, went over through the talk so far, you know, DataOps really is the idea of like building high quality training data set. And you have to asking some of this question like, what data, where to find that data, how much data, where to validate the data, and then what defines data quality, where to store that data, how to organize that data, right? So my next slide is essentially my my goals of, you know, proposing an ideal DataOps pipeline for the modern computation stack. And this is a rough sketch that I put together last year based on a lot of conversation with practitioners in the field, some thought leaders, as well as various research through articles and content from different vendors. And this is definitely a work in progress. And if anyone interested in sort of like provide commentary or feedback on it, I'm happy to reach out to me afterwards to dissect it, right? But I will go over some of the details of this diagram right here. So the first block, you have data acquisition. When we talk about data acquisition, we tend to think more about data collection. So data collection is the idea of like, you collect data. There's both the physical and operational consideration with this, ranging from where to collect the data to how much to collect initially, right? But besides data collection, you can also generate synthetic data. And there's a lot of use cases in this scenario, like from facial recognition to e-commerce to autonomous driving, right? However, getting this synthetic data requires a lot of training data and compute. And furthermore, synthetic data is not realistic for some of the more unique use cases. And currently, I think that there's like a fundamental research on the impact on model development. And then the third approach to acquire more data is what I call data scavenging. So essentially the idea of that you can scrape the internet for data, or you can like use open source data set. You can go to Kaggle, or you can go to academic benchmark and just download them to use for your system. Yep. The second building block is data labeling. So this is an industry of its own because you have to answer so many questions. Who should label the data? How should the data be labeled? And then what data should be labeled? And I think like getting this labeling step right is extremely complicated because it is error prone, slow, expensive, and often impractical. An efficient labeling operation could require a vetted process, high quality people to do it, high performance tooling, and its own life cycle, like a versioning system, as well as a QA process. Because you have to do QA for every labelers, right? So it's a lot of work. That's the idea. The third building block is data debugging. So data debugging entails writing expectation tests to address the data preprocessing and storage system. Essentially, these are the unit tests for your data, and they are designed to catch data quality issues and bad data before this issue make their way into the DataOps pipeline. The fourth building block is data augmentation, which is a scientific process where you can manipulate the data via flipping, rotation, translation, rescaling, and so much more. However, scaling that augmentation to bigger datasets, negating memorization, and handling some of the corner cases are still some of the fundamental issues that you have to think about when applying augmentation to your training data. The fifth building block is data transformation, and this phase included 3 different steps. So you have data formatting, which is a small slide of the whole data engineering task that interface with data warehouse, data lakes, and data pipeline. The idea is you want to format the data in a correct format, so the scientists can work with it. Feature engineering is another phase that include concepts such as like feature store, management of correlation, management of missing records, and going from feature selection to feature embeddings. And then data fusion is the last step. That means fusing your data from different modalities, different sensors, and different timelines. The sixth block is data curation, and I think this is probably one of the most underrated block within this whole life cycle, because it's basically bridge the gap between the DataOps pipeline and the MLOps pipeline. So it's like the thing that connect the two roles. And the idea of data curation is like, okay, so you need to be picky about choosing what data to use for your ML system, right? And therefore, you want to catalog your data and structure your data in a way that make that process easier. Couple of ideas, that I think of. You can sort your data by use cases. You can make your data searchable using predefined tags, or you can cluster your data using specific embeddings and metadata. And after you're doing cataloging and structuring of your data, you need to select the data that is most useful for your ML system. And when I say useful, that basically means the data point that's going to have a higher likelihood of improving your model performance in production. And then to sort of close this feedback loop, we have the final block I call failures and edge case detection. And the idea is like you want to detect your data drift, monitor your ML system metrics, and then perform data observability, right? So when your model's in the real world, it's gonna fail on some cases, and you want to collect those failure cases, and then you want to basically like acquire more training data points of those failure cases to be used for the next iteration of your computer vision workflow. So we can over time, it's gonna the more edge cases that your system can handle, the better your model performance is gonna improve over time. So I kind of want to go deeper into some of the specifically 3 challenges that are related to the data that any computer vision teams have to deal with. Basically, pick the 3 that I think is the most important one based on the diagram that I showed in the previous slide. Challenge number 1 is to curate high quality data points. And just to kind of give a definition, data curation is the process of discovering, examining, and sampling data for specific analytic tasks. And I think in the context of computer vision, though, data curation is very underrated, because currently I think there's not a streamlined method to understand what kind of data has been collected and curated into a well-balanced, high-quality data set. And unfortunately, though, like data curation is very time-consuming, and also it requires a lot of domain knowledge, because you need to understand data well enough to like actually curate good data points, right? And some of the existing data curation techniques cannot keep up with the 4 V's of big data: volume, velocity, variety, and veracity. And therefore, these solutions tend to be very narrow, because they primarily learn from the correlation being present in the training data, and as a result, they cannot like, encode domain knowledge in general. So what's an ideal solution here? I think like an ideal, like a functional DataOps platform for computer vision must have data curation capabilities, and more specifically, this platform should be able to like visualize massive data set, discover and retrieve data with ease, curate diverse scenarios, and integrate seamlessly with existing workflows and tools. And I can talk more about like some of what it actually look like from a feature perspective. Second challenge is to label and audit data at massive scale. So you probably know that, like training computer vision models require like, a constant fit of large and accurately labeled data set, right? Like garbage in, garbage out principle. You need good high quality data that are labeled. But the fact is like, in order to get that label, high quality labeled data set, it usually requires a considerable time and capital commitment, because like most of the labeling and quality assurance is done manually by the humans. And so I work at a startup called SuperAI, and we, our original product was a data labeling platform. So this is like basically our bread and butter. And we talk with a lot of data, and data engineers and ML engineers over the past 2 years or so. And based on like more than 200 conversations, we noticed that data labeling and data auditing are still some of the major bottlenecks within the data preparation pipeline for computer vision system. And interesting enough, this bottleneck apply to both some of the company that is very early in the ML adoption, as well as some of the company that's already like more mature in the adoption. For instance, right? So for some of the companies that is like in early stage ML development, they do not have any like models that is, specifically pre-trained on the domain-specific data set that they have. And for some of the more mature teams with models already in production, the idea is they want to like collect more edge case, like where the model is failing, so that they can improve the model over time. So like regardless of like, the maturity of your ML adoption, you need to collect good data. That's the kind of my takeaway main message. So like an effective DataOps platform for computer vision, I think must address both data labeling and data auditing. And at my team at SuperAI, we try to build this platform. We're currently building it, and basically we try to beta test it with some of the Lighthouse customers, and we try to help them to automatically label data, identify and audit some of the hard labels, and then use active learning techniques to verify the QA of the labels. And basically some of the results, as some of our clients has been able to deliver the data sets, in a matter of days instead of months that they used to have. This is the third and the final challenge: account for data drift. So computer vision systems suffer from a major limitation that constrain the accuracy on real-world visual data captured at a specific moment in the past. This system have a built-in assumption where the mapping function of the input data used to predict output data is assumed to be static. Now, however, in practice, like the visual data drifts over time because the data comes from a dynamic time-evolving distribution, and this phenomenon is known as data drift. And in these instances, the prediction made by a model trained on historical data may no longer be valid, and then your model performance could begin to decrease over time. And especially as more machine learning application move towards streaming data, the potential for model failure due to data drift can exacerbate easily. And so there are different costs of data drift: upstream process changes, data quality issue, natural drift in the data, and covariance shift. I think that a robust DataOps platform for computer vision must be able to detect the drift and raise alert so they can, debug the issue as soon as possible. Analyze where and why drift happens, and then adapt the model to drift and then improve model performance. And the last one is really hard because you need to perform your model in a way, you need to design your system in a way that it can, resilient towards the inevitability of drift happening, and then actually improve the performance over time as a result of that. So I want to sort of conclude my talk with like really quick few slides on the future of the modern computation stack. I think that the modern computation stack gonna follow this footstep of the modern data stack. So if you're not familiar with this concept, so the modern data stack is a collection of cloud native tools centered around a cloud data warehouse. And together, these tools, comprise a data platform. And there are so many benefits for enterprise to adopt a modern data stack. Number one is ease of use. So all these tools is built around the data warehouse. And as a result of that, it minimizes integration pain points and silo data platforms that requires a lot of effort spent shifting data around. Second benefit is wide adoption. The common SQL is the language that is the lingua franca that creates a common foundation to work with data across discipline. And so like everyone knows SQL, so like it's so easy to adopt all these different tools. The third benefit is automation. So the idea is like, the data practitioners have more time to operate, like, it's easier for them to operationalize their data workflows. And the fourth benefit is cost. So if you work in the cloud, you only pay for what you use and nothing more. And that means you can get more done in less time with fewer resources. And as the modern data stack continue to grow and evolve, there's so many new technologies and vendors that are entering the conversation. So I put here in my slide a diagram created by the team at Continua that entails the current main function areas of the modern data stack. So you have the cloud data warehouse sitting at the center. You have data integration, event tracking, transformation, machine learning and AI, business intelligence, reverse ETL, and then data governance. And I think we're seeing like something similar happening in the modern machine learning stack. So as I mentioned earlier, I work at SuperAI, and SuperAI is part of a newly formed organization called AI Infrastructure Alliance. And this alliance is dedicated to bringing together the essential building blocks for the AI application of today and tomorrow. And the thesis that we have is that right now we are seeing the evolution of a canonical stack for machine learning. And this stack is coming together through the efforts of many different people, different projects, and different organizations. And that is why we create this alliance to act as a focal point that brings together so many different groups in one place. And the member of the alliance have to bring the clarity to this ML stack by establishing clean API, integration points, and open standard for how different components of a complete enterprise machine learning stack can and should interoperate. And the goal is like, it helps organizations to make better decisions about the type of tools that they can deploy in the AI application stack of today and tomorrow. And this diagram that I put here in the slide is an early draft of some of the emerging patterns that we have seen across 100 members of the AI Infrastructure Alliance. And there's an article by Dan and Jeffries, the president of the Alliance, that I put here. And you can go follow that to learn more. And this is my last slide. Final talking about here. So I want to conclude my talk with a diagram that broadcasts some of the type of companies that made up the ML infrastructure stack, and is created by a blog post written by investors at Founders Fund. And essentially, there's five major categories: making core workflow better, faster, and cheaper; optimizing communication; improving production model reliability; augmenting data programmatically; and removing the need for specialized ML engineers. And all these tools can be fit into one of these categories. So highly recommend taking a look to like this explore more what are the options in the market right now. And with that, I appreciate your attention for listening to my talk. I put here some content. If you want to follow up and discuss with me, channels with me on how the modern computer vision stack might look like, feel free to reach out via Twitter. And if you're interested in some of my work and my team at SuperAI is doing, I put my email on the slide. And I also have a website where I did a lot of the writing and podcasting with like people in the data and ML space. So if you want to follow, subscribe on that, could be happy to do so.